One of the areas of my research is enterprise transformation. In particular, how do we take an architecting approach to the transformation of enterprises? This is an area of research that I've worked with a collaborator, Deborah Nightingale. We produced a recent book called Architecting the Future Enterprise, where we describe a framework for how one can take an architecting approach to transforming an enterprise. We've seen failures in enterprise transformation where people try to address a future need simply through process re-engineering or simply through putting in a new IT system. An enterprise is a very complex entity, and it has many different moving parts. And as you're transforming one piece of it, there are things happening throughout the whole enterprise that impact that. So you really need to take a very holistic approach to enterprise transformation. In the framework that we've produced in our research, we take an architecting approach. We start with looking at the current state. What are the desired attributes that we want for the future? We envision the future, and then we look at alternative solutions to what you could do. We come up with a set of alternative architectures, and then we go through a real evaluation process to figure out which particular architecture we want to choose. The overall goal of this is to get a blueprint for your transformation. You wouldn't start remodeling your house by just taking a hammer and knocking down walls. Similarly, you have to really sit down and think through the whole problem of how you want to transform the enterprise. In addition to taking a suboptimal approach, we've seen that oftentimes enterprise transformations involve looking at the problem or the need, sitting down with a group of people, and figuring out what you want to do. Kind of jumping to a solution without the time to sit back and reflect on what could be possible, and then going through a real evaluation to look at it in a more serious way. This is what our framework is designed to do. So an example of a project that we've done in the past with this, applying this framework that we developed, was a case of a wellness center that was developed within a medical facility. It was done as a pilot program to serve the employees of the hospital to try to foster wellness. And in studying how it worked out, it was thought to be a very successful model that could be used in a much wider way. So an architecting team looked at what could we possibly do to grow this type of entity. There were different types of alternatives then that were raised. One was to continue with an internal focus to this particular enterprise and try to make it more widely available to all the members of the healthcare community. Another was to make this available to those that were the stakeholders served by the hospital. And in this case, there were a couple different alternatives. One would be to scale up the services within this one center and try to deliver more of it. And another architecting form that was suggested was to actually kind of clone this and to place regional centers that could serve both the members of the hospital itself as well as the customer, as well as the clients of that hospital. So all of these different forms were then evaluated, and one of these was chosen. So once several alternatives of this were chosen, an evaluation approach was applied to try to determine which one would have the most benefit given the resources that could be brought to bear. Once the team decided on the approach, an implementation plan for that was developed. So as we see this shift from traditional engineering to digital paradigm, we're finding that enterprises need to transform themselves in a significant way. Traditional engineering involves lots of documentation and writing of extensive specifications and reports. Moving into a model-based environment means that the documents kind of go away and the models themselves are what are used for the engineering of a system. So what we're finding in practice is that companies that are trying to transform themselves to undertake this model-based approach to engineering are oftentimes starting with how do we just kind of rewrite our engineering practices, or how do we just insert new technology in so that we'll be able to train everybody to use these tools, and that will change how we engineer systems. In reality, it has to go much further than that. For example, does the organization have to change? And certainly the culture has to change. As we found in our research, trust in models is a significant issue that determines how successful you can be. So in transforming your enterprise, you really have to consider these cultural dimensions too. How do you engender this trust in models? It's about the infrastructure you need. It's about how information has to flow across the enterprise in ways that perhaps it hadn't in the past. Different types of knowledge might be needed. Different types of resources might be needed. Interesting problems arise from a cultural perspective. For example, the people who usually end up in the senior decision maker's office in a traditional engineering situation are the people who have been with a company for 20, 30 years. But now you may need some very junior people in that room, the people who grew up on model-centric engineering. And so bringing different types of people into the mix changes the culture, it changes how you operate. All of these things have to be considered when you transform an enterprise.